And with that, I will open up the meeting and start with our first presenter, Mr. Brian Arnold from the City of Dayton. Brian is the GIS coordinator for the City of Dayton Department of Water, and that's Dayton, Ohio. Brian has been with the city since 2015, starting as a GIS analyst and rising to the GIS coordinator. Brian has an associate's degree in business systems from Edison State Community College, a bachelor's degree in urban planning. Department of Water GIS division supports the entire City of Dayton organization. Serving the entire organization allows us to have many different GIS experiences with multiple departments and allows us to work collaboratively with many departments at a single time. Please welcome Brian Arnold with When Tragedy Precipitates Innovation. Brian?
Well, thank you, Ryan. I'll show my video, show my face. I won't leave it up the whole time. I won't put anybody through that. But hello, thank you guys for having me. I do appreciate it. So I am Brian Arnold, the GIS coordinator from the Department of Water, City of Dayton, Ohio. We're a city of about 140,000 people. And for the most part, for a mid-sized city, we have a lot of stuff going on, but it's not too terrible most of the time, with the exception of last year, and it bled into this year. Last year was by far the worst that I can remember. Been alive for 37 years. It was one of the worst years. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, get through a little presentation, then most of it is a solution we came up with. So here are just a few headlines that started last year in February and came to an end in September, I believe. So as you can see, we had a large water main break in February that depressurized our entire system. 400,000 people lost water. That took about a week to get everything back in order. And then Memorial Day weekend, we had a KKK rally scheduled. I think we ended up spending $635,000 on people, personnel, security items, assets, and I think the total for the protesters, it was like 9 KKK members. The rest of them were counter-protesters. The day we were scheduled to take the EOC down, they said, you know what, we're going to do it on Monday. And that night, 15 tornadoes hit the area and once again depressurized our entire system. That took much longer, of course, but about a week of it was spent in the EOC. Then in August, a gunman went into a busy entertainment district, started firing shots and killed 9 people, injuring many, many more. Shortly after that, we had a Dayton firefighter commit suicide because all he had seen in the months leading up to that. In October, we had a 30-year veteran of our police department. He was shot serving a warrant. And then, as everybody has come to know, COVID hit this year. But what we wanted to do when we were going through each event, it was one-off solutions. We would create a map, create something else, create 10 other things, and then at the end of the event, we just deleted everything. So what we wanted to come up with was a solution that brought everything together. We would have a solution to cover a large water main break, a KKK rally, the planning of that and the event management, tornadoes, and COVID hit, and we actually worked all that stuff into it as well. Made everything a whole lot easier. So instead of just talking about it, I'll go ahead and show you everybody. Took me about a month to build, but just a lot of it was putting all the pieces together, bringing all the data in. So this first tab here, create the plan, is centered around the KKK rally. You've got a lot of items that need to be put into place before people get here. So, and this is a very basic plan I have out here now.
Hey, Brian, I think your app may be on a different screen, so we're only seeing this one.
Oh, I'm sorry, hold on just a second. Okay, can everybody see that now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I apologize. So I'm on the plan creation tab. Get things moved around here. So what I did is I wanted to give event planners a way to put their assets, their personnel into place, their routes, their zones, their areas. So I took this from the Esri event management solution and put it into our own. But it's fairly simple to, I don't know why, I like fire ATVs. I put those everywhere. But you just click on the point, click in your map, name it, and you can actually put your start time, end time, notes. You can put your number of firefighters. So then when it's all done, you'll have more of a more complete solution. And again, this one's very basic as well. This is one we had over when the protesting was occurring a couple months ago. But just gives a good overview of where people are going, what's going on. So we had that in place, and actually one piece that was added was a public viewing site. In our large downtown protests a couple months ago, we had people who lived downtown, they were getting blocked out of their houses. Nobody knew what was going on. Nobody knew where they could get to their house. Police officers didn't even really know. So our administration wanted a way to put out a public map for people to view what was happening. So we came up with a public viewing site. It's almost identical to the plan creation, with the exception it has a print function on it. So if it ever loads up, so you can simply print a map. So very basic, but very useful. The main piece I want to focus on, so that's all great, but the main piece to many of the events is the event management section. So what we did is we nested about 6, 7 dashboards into a single dashboard. Because we have so many departments that work together in the EOC, we wanted fire to have an area, police, water, public works. We tried to incorporate as many as we could. So the fire section, it will show you all active incidents. Currently, I think it's set to refresh every 2 minutes. On your left side, you see all the incidents. On your right side, you see how many apparatus are available. I haven't had time to break that out more into engines and medics and anything else. Police is the same way. It's all your incidents, all your crews available. I incorporated traffic from the Living Atlas, as well as our ODOT cameras, or our Department of Transportation cameras. These refresh every 10 minutes. And oddly, from a fire chief, this was the most interesting part, because they could look at it and see if something was going on northbound or southbound. That was the most interesting part for them. So I took that as a win. The weather, I made it really simple on myself. I just used weatherchannel.com. Everybody knows how to use it. The service request, it currently looks like a big blob, and there is actually a story behind it. So when we had the 15 tornadoes, we had multiple resources going to the same location at different times. We had a police officer get dispatched, hey, there's a tree across the road. They went, they said, yep, there's a tree across the road. They cleared the scene. They dispatched a fire engine, same thing. Yep, it's there, and then they left. And then we finally had a public works crew go and clean it up. So what I wanted to do was, let's say there's a bunch of calls for streets in one particular area, and up here at Stanley and 75 was where the tornado mainly hit. There would be a big cluster of them. We could say, okay, we need to send some resources there. So that's service request. That's also how I linked it back to water, just so I could tell my bosses, hey, we've got something that's water related in there. SurgeNet doesn't show anything. This is for the EMS link to hospitals. It will show this is how many folks we can accept. 1 green, 2 red, 1 yellow. So in the event of a mass shooting, an EMS official can look at it and say, okay, take police officer 1, take this red to this hospital. Okay, next guy, take to another hospital. So they have that quick knowledge. So the next tab that was also useful in the protest and would have been for the KKK rally was the social media tab. So we set all this up, and it has tweets and YouTube and webcams, travel, Flickr, Instagram. But the police department said, hey, this was useful because it showed us what's going on downtown. They actually saw a guy tweeting a picture with a long gun saying, hey, I'm going to shoot the police downtown. And they ended up stopping him, arresting him. So that was very useful to them. So one of the late additions that we got, and I'll actually go back to this one, was police and fire wanted to have the ability to track their units and their apparatus. So this one is just a basic, it shows where people are at. These are police officers, and I'm down to the south, but there was the night of the tornado, a fire engine got lost out in Troutwood because it was so dark. They couldn't find their way back. They were stuck out there with downed trees, and so they wanted to be able to say, hey, where are my units? We've got some plans for the future to incorporate the workforce piece into the fire and police dashboards, give it a little smoother look. I just haven't had time to do that. So before we could really deploy this to everybody, COVID hit. And COVID, a lot of the stuff our city wanted, we already had done. So it was a pretty smooth transition to create a hub real quick, stand up some dashboards. And this was done in a matter of probably 3 days. But we stood up a lot of the same dashboards, some a little more in depth, some that aren't as in depth. But because we had done the work up front on another solution, all of this came together seamlessly. And people use this every day just to see what's going on. It gives them that operational knowledge. We've also included some of our staffing numbers in there so we can track what's going on with our staff. So with that, I will end my presentation, and feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you very much, Brian. We did have one question in the chat so far. Was that if this is public facing, would you be willing to provide a link in the chat?
So this is not public facing. I have a training document that shows all pieces of this. The reason we didn't put it public facing, we have a lot of our operational details in there.
Sure.
That they aren't public knowledge. A lot of our police officers are in the workforce management. A lot of our sex offenses are in there. We just unfortunately can't release it. But okay. I can definitely send out the training document that shows how we put it together and all the pieces to it.
Yeah, I think that would be a great resource for everybody. Okay, we're getting some questions in now. Did you capture information on what devices that the users use to consume the maps and dashboard? Is it mostly mobile?
So we had a mixed response. We actually use a desktop device in our EOC. We use mobile devices currently for our workforce piece and viewing all the dashboards and maps. We use iPads as well. And then in our fire apparatus and police cruisers, we use MDCs, so mobile command centers. So a lot of the devices you could use, I've heard they've been using, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Cross-platform is very, very good. Let's see. The social media feed, is that based on geotagged posts and not the device location info?
I believe it's geotag. The social media map I did was from I apologize, I'm trying to think. It's an ArcGIS online template that is currently out there. And I can show that real quick, but all you essentially do is go along and select what feed you want. And for this one, I did everything. But then like on Flickr, you put your filters in as well as Twitter and YouTube. So, and then based on that filter, it will show you. And I think it's geotagging the post. I'm not 100% sure though.
Okay. Okay. And lastly, was this tool requested by the emergency management, or was this something that GIS just saw a solution and went to incorporate it into the workflow?
So how this came about, once we never really got a break last year. So once everything kind of settled down, a captain from the fire department and a sergeant from the police department, within a day of each other, requested something. They wanted help. The police department wanted some way to create an event plan for what would have been this year's KKK rally. The fire captain, he wanted a event management solution for the EOC. We were using hand maps and drawing on a whiteboard. So and I'm really close with both of them, so it was easy for them to call, and I ran with it. The setup came from Mike King with Esri. I contacted him, and he showed me some of the stuff that the Arizona governor's office has used, and there were a couple other ones, but once I saw that, I had the vision in mind, and we kind of ran with it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. And if there's any more questions that come up, if you want a one-on-one demo of more features, please email me. I'm more than happy to do what I can to help other folks, because it's been very useful so far.
Absolutely. I think that's much appreciated by everybody. With that, virtual round of applause for Brian. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time, and thank you again for presenting.
Thank you all for having me.
Okay. Up next, we have Emma. I have personally seen this presentation already, and it's a great use of GIS. I'm really looking forward to seeing this presentation again. A science and technology enthusiast since her early youth, Emma is fulfilling her techie destiny as a GIS developer for the city of Charleston, writing code to wrangle city-related data for various departments and engineering custom web tools for the benefit of their community. While she programs to her heart's content by day, Emma caps off her love of mapping by co-leading a run-into-shape group, carefully planning and completing unique routes that make fun and interesting shapes from a bird's eye point of view. Please welcome Emma with Carriage Alert Mapping Platform, real-time GIS to manage tours and equine waste. Emma, are you with us?
Hey, Ryan, sorry.
Hello.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the invite. Sorry to run a little bit late. We are now monitoring Tropical Storm Isaias. That is an early start to our emergency ops season, so that's exciting. But I'm excited to join you guys and see some more presentations. And in the meantime, we'll go ahead and share what I've got to show. And hopefully my computer here cooperates. All right. Well, yeah, let's ride into modern times. Traditionally, we'd be in a room, right? Got to scrap out the traditional. I don't know if you've been to Charleston, but it's a beautiful, beautiful city. And there's several Charlestons. There's probably one per every state, right? So to be clear, we're talking about Charleston, South Carolina. That's where I live and work happily. And here in Charleston, we're lucky that if you haven't been, there are lots of reasons to come. People come to work here. There's a big Silicon Harbor reference going on around town. There's a big tech community that's kind of been growing here lately. We have a couple of universities. There's the Medical University of South Carolina and the College of Charleston, my alma mater. So people come to school here, and people come to visit here for fun because there's a lot of great food. There's a lot of awesome scenery to just soak in, right? And so we get a lot of visitors, so many that don't let this graph fool you, right? If you look closely on the left, this is a log scale, and there's really no comparison. The number of actual residents within the city of Charleston is very few to the influx of visitors in a traditional year that we would be seeing. Really, I think it comes down to about 20,000 visitors a day on average. So we get a lot of people coming through, and it's great. You know, people come here by car, by plane, by cruise ship. At least they have in the past. And when they get here, they're presented with a very traditional or historic way of transportation. They can walk or they can do carriage tours, which I personally love, even having lived here for a decade now. It's crazy to say that. I moved here for school, and I guess that's how long it's been. But yeah, so even living here, you know, it's great to go on a carriage tour. You get a nice you get to soak up a lot of the city in a short amount of time. I mean, it's nice to walk too, but sometimes, especially on a hot summer day, that becomes more difficult. And so carriage tours are a really big thing that people do here. So much so that I think, again, traditionally, the numbers come out to about 5,000 tours a month, which in the context of it probably doesn't mean anything, but when you narrow it down to like the amount of time during the day that these carriage tours operate, it comes to one carriage every 30 seconds on average. So this is a big thing, and it's a lot of fun. And of course, there's some side effects, right? It's not a perfect industry. And really, livability, the Department of the city's livability and tourism department, they have their hands full because they're managing kind of both sides of this industry. They're managing the carriage companies and making sure they're in compliance with all of their logistics. And they're also managing the other side, right? Which is having to manage the waste that's generated or spills, as they identify them as of this industry. And so traditionally, so this little ball is something that you would encounter when you're out roaming our streets. And I've seen people pick these up. I wouldn't personally recommend it, but they're small, right? They're small. And the idea is, you know, it's a very simple way of tracking where the horses go, because inevitably they do go. They go, you know, on average once per day, because each horse doesn't do that many tours. But in any case, there's a lot of going that happens on these tours. So a tour guide that's giving a tour that talks about the history and architecture of our city, they're focused on that. But, they have to watch traffic. And so on tour, they would go off to the side and the horse might go, or if they have two horses, both horses might go at one point or another. And then at the end of the tour, while they would throw this flag out while the horse is going to mark, the flag would mark where the horse went. At the end of a tour, right, an hour tour, which, may have been delayed by about 45 minutes from the time the horse went until they got back. At the end of the tour, they would have two issues to deal with, really. One is to remember to make a call that, this thing happened, the spill happened. And then two, it would be to have to remember where it happened. And if it was two horses, then where both of them happened, right? And they may be unique places around the city. Now, mind you, they're professionals, but it happens to everyone. Imagine, doing 5 tours halfway into your day and having to remember all of these, right? So you can kind of see this buildup of issues having to do with the system that was in place, right? And there's just a lot of questions as to were all the spills getting reported? Were all the spills getting called in so that the cleanup company could go and manage them? And really, they weren't, right? There are too many questions, and both residents and business owners weren't shy about calling the city and letting them know that this was becoming a problem, because in the heat of summer they can smell if something isn't being treated. So I'm really not sure. I've been with the city a couple of years now, and I came into this project after everyone had agreed to things. But the story goes that the Department of Livability and Tourism, under the pressure of residents and business owners, they started to do some research, and they came across this idea of like, well, what if they could just press a button, right? Like just an easy button. And it's really, again, I don't know if they just watched a video about it, but it was a brilliant idea, right? Because now a carriage driver goes from tossing a flag, an easy motion, right, that doesn't take very little thought, but then, that was followed up by all these issues of remembering the location and remembering to call every time. Now, if we could replace that easy motion of dropping a flag with just dropping, right, pressing a button, and then having everything else fall in line afterwards, then everything would be easier, right? They could go on about their trip and never have to remember where the location of the spills on their last tour ever again. And so that's essentially what happened, right? Department of Livability and Tourism came to GIS and said, we need help, right? Because ultimately we need to know where, but we need to fix all the hows in between. And so that's the implementation for KAMP, the Carriage Alerts Mapping Platform that we've decided to call it, right? Everything's gotta have a clever name. But essentially, KAMP relies on a simple action, right, with this very simple device, and then everything else just kind of falls down the line automatically. And that's the power of GPS technology, together with Geoevent, which is Esri's proprietary server to listen for specific signals, right, or listen to specific map services and that sort of thing. So that's the start to the platform. And then from there, everything's kind of funneled onto a web mapping application that I'll show you. And then from there, right, we can take things a step further and actually track that data and push that out back to the public and to the department admins so that they can track things in real time, again, on both ends. So I'm going to dive into each of these pieces of the platform. Everything's kind of built in-house. And again, the magic starts with these simple devices that it was actually kind of hard to find a vendor to sell just the device with the signal. And every vendor too, they want to provide the device and they want to provide the software that goes with it. But the software never is quite what you need. So finally we found a vendor who would sell us the devices. And so there's a contract with them. The data is on us. So each of these devices runs on a SIM card. And so it works with our internet provider. Essentially the vendor is providing the communications on the back end, but they funnel the TCP signal, which is what this little device puts out through the cellular networks. They funnel that to our server. And, just for those who are interested in how this works, especially because we're a government entity, right? So we have a lot of our servers that are just internal, right, behind a firewall. And then we have a couple of publicly accessible servers. And so just for the sake of security, right, these GPS devices have to communicate to our public server, and that's where they're funneling the traffic to. And then from there, we kind of take it over, and our public server enters through the firewall, pushes the signal after setting some net commands. They funnel the signal so that our outer server funnels the signal to our inner servers, and that's where Geoevent is. And that's one of the capabilities of Geoevent. Geoevent is just again, proprietary advisory software, and it just kind of sits there, right? And you can program it a couple different ways. It can sit there, and then you can program it so that every few minutes or every few seconds, it goes out somewhere and fetches data, or it can sit there and just have an ear out listening for specific signals on a specific port. So that's how this is running. The GPS device, again, it sends the TCP signal to our DMZ on the outside. That's pushed inside to our Geoevent server, and then through some filters and definitions, Geoevent does the mapping, and I'll show you that in just a little bit. But that's on the front end of Geoevent as a listener, right, or as a go and getter. Geoevent also handles notifications. So now, as a way of knowing that the system is up and running, or as a way to notify both admin or the cleanup crew, right? We have email and text messaging notifications set up based on an entry, right? So every time a button is pressed that's coming through to Geoevent, it's getting mapped, right? But even before it gets mapped, there's a notification that pops out. So what does it get mapped to? Well, that's another server, right? Providing not just a map service, but a feature service that is editable, and it's funneled, it's read by Geoevent. And so those are tied together. So Geoevent takes the location information and maps it. And of course, start off just talking about one system, but really I think they're up to a fleet of 40 GPS units. And again, the vendor, they supply them. We actually just got a new batch in, and they supplied the software documentation so that in Geoevent we could essentially teach Geoevent how to decipher that TCP signal, that TCP message that is coming through. So let's dive into Geoevent a little bit. Geoevent, it works a lot like ModelBuilder. So if you're familiar with ModelBuilder, or if not, really there's so much software, web software out there that's drag and drop, right? So that's how Geoevent works. You have connectors that do certain things, and then you have, for really to process anything, right? You have an input and an output. So the greens are the input boxes and the blues are all the outputs. So the green, we only have one in, right? That's our TCP message from each device coming in through cellular network. And again, just with the device documentation, we know we can expect a certain number of fields within the message. And so this is a Geoevent definition based on all the fields that are going to come in. These are all the attributes that are tagged to every message that comes in with these devices. In Geoevent, it's smart to track things. So track ID is Geoevent's version of an object ID, right? And that's to keep track of unique events, unique events. And then there's date fields, and then the geometry field, which is important for actually putting it on a map, right, in the feature service. So actually diving in a little deeper, that message that comes in, it's just a long string. And you've got to, again, do the work, a little bit of work, and helping Geoevent decipher it. And so how does Geoevent know to make geometry? Well, you got to tell it, these are the fields that are the X and the Y. So look to these fields to create the geometry that you map. And how do you decipher the fields? Well, the fields are going to come in and they're going to be comma delimited. So it's, I guess, similar to importing a text file into Excel and specifying that you have comma delimited lists and things like that. And then probably among the most complicated, and of course, right, time. How is time interpreted? Well, every device does it differently. So really key is being able to format this input service to know how it's expecting the time that's coming in. So that's just a question of mashing up, right? What the attributes are that we're expecting and what we're getting and what symbols to look out for. So that's those are kind of the details behind the input connector, that TCP in the green box. Now what we do in Geoevent is add filters, right? So really these GPS devices, they set out lots of different signals. They're really kind of cool. They send out signals for every time they're in motion. So, and there's a lot of settings on the back end that you can configure, but essentially every 30 seconds they can throw out just their position, right? They can also say, oh, I've stopped, right? So if a GPS unit doesn't move for 30 seconds, then it sends out a different kind of signal, right? So there's some attributes, particularly, let's see if I can go back. Yeah, this message type field, that very top field. So that's going to be a series of characters, and you map it to, or you decipher it through the documentation, and you can parse out different messages, right? So in our particular service, we care about when the button is pressed. So that's what our filters are for, and those are the processors in yellow. And whenever we get alerts, right, you'll see that some of the outputs are those text messages or emails. And then before we map it, right, so the FS out is feature service out, we have to map the original attributes to whatever is in the map service. So mapping those schemas together, and then cleaning up, so you can do some field calculations too to clean up. What we do here is strip out the first really obnoxious 10 digits of the IMEI because we don't need all of that. We just need the 5 unique digits at the end. So you can do things like that in Geoevent. All that data gets pushed to the feature service, and that's where the web map kind of takes over, right? The web map is a map that relays the map service version, so the read-only version of this data, in one context, actually. In another context, there's also the editable version for the waste management company to be able to go in and close out when they actually clean up a spill. So the web mapping application, again, this was developed because the software that the vendor of the GPS units, they wanted to provide more managing software, how to manage the devices and how to track them, but nothing to the extent that we needed. So we built something custom, and mind you, the cleanup vendor, they don't know GIS, so it had to be really simple, and so that's why we went custom. So I'll give you a preview of it in just a couple of slides, but it's based on Esri's JavaScript API, which all of Esri's new configurables are starting to get written in their new API. And it's a supplemented, so it's JavaScript supplemented with materialized, so it looks good, and it's mobile friendly. So the cleanup crew is on their mobile devices, and they're just tracking the X's as they pop up, or as they get a text message. So they can go to an X and tap it and then close it when they've cleaned it up. And it's just a couple of clicks, and all of a sudden, now we have actually data coming in that we just listened for in a map service, cleaned up view, and we spit it out in a couple of dashboards. This happens to be a sample of an early on version of an administrative dashboard, so that back in the office, livability and tourism can track, okay, which companies are sending tour guides that are actually reporting, right? Because again, backtracking to the old way, there was a lot of forgetfulness in the old way, but it was hard to pinpoint who wasn't doing the reporting, right? So now with the power of dashboards, it's easy to track which companies, which tour guides even are reporting, and see if, you know, the reporting is actually matching the actual carriage tours that are happening that day. And then on the flip side too, before there wasn't any accountability for, well, which spills are getting cleaned up, right? So if a citizen called or a business owner called to complain, there was no way of tracking, you know, whether maybe they were right, or maybe they were just, you know, calling about last month's issues, right? But they were, you know, maybe today's spills were actually cleaned up. So there wasn't a way of tracking that. But now, once something's mapped through Geoevent and the cleanup crew closes it through the JavaScript, that's where that happens. We're looking for the nearest address, right? So there are records, there's data that we're feeding into the simple point, the simple XY. There's all sorts of data that's aggregated together. And honestly, this is a data set that needs to be looked at. I think maybe in the coming year, that's an ongoing future project of analyzing all this wealth of data that we've been able to collect while improving the system. And really, I think livability and tourism would say that, you know, this has made their life so much easier, just in that it's efficient. They hold everyone accountable, and they don't get as many calls. Not nearly. I don't think they get hardly any calls. So with that, again, thanks for having me. I hope I didn't blow through that too quickly, but I'm happy to take all sorts of questions.
Let's see, we have one question asking, what are the GPS units that are used?
Yeah, so these are, oh gosh, it's a good question. You know what, I have one. Give me just a second. Yeah, so the company that we're getting these from is called Vestige, Vestige, And the actual GPS unit is manufactured by a company called Queclink, Queclink. And they hold up a charge for about the day's worth, and they're charged by just like a phone through a micro USB port, and then they've got the little SIM card portal, and that's about it. They have an on-off button, and then the main button, which is actually, there's two functions. There's a simple press, and then there's a long double press. So if we wanted, well, I showed you an early version of what we're configuring the project to be, a version where we might listen for the single press for spills and a double press for something else, like maybe if there's an accident or something like that. But early on, it kind of turned out that the tour guides were confusing the single press and the double press. So we haven't gotten back around to talking about whether that's worth implementing or not. But these particular devices can let you do that. And this is, just to be thorough, this is the GL300MA model of the Queclink.
All right, thank you. Yeah, you've got a lot of comments in here just saying great presentation and awesome to see how GIS can be implemented to solve a very unique problem.
Yeah, and I think that's the value in this, right? And what I like to highlight is a really simple action that just it's easy to replace, and it's magical how everything else just can happen behind the scenes. So that's really the intent of sharing our work.
Yeah, absolutely. You have one other question. How many carriages are in operation at any given time, and how many cleanup crews are out roaming? Yeah,
so that's great questions. Fortunately, I know, because I get to spy on them every now and then just to make sure the system is up and running. Yeah, so it's kind of complicated because the city's split up into zones, and just depending on residential versus high commerce zones. And then there's special zones because, inevitably a part of the city may be inaccessible. So there's kind of a lottery system that's in place, and every zone has a different number of carriages that are allowed. So depending on the zones that are open on any given day, that also takes into account the logistics of, what are the busiest days of the year and stuff like that. It can be anywhere between really at 10, 15, 20 carriages out. So it's quite a sight to see on a nice cooler spring day. That's the best time to go, and that's the busiest.
Awesome.
Yeah. Oh, and the cleanup crew, there's one company, and they have, to the best of my knowledge, they have two shifts that kind of overlap in the middle of the day. And so they're out there just, following the map, and they're following the clusters and getting at them more quickly. So that's how it works.
Great. Well, I think I see another presentation in your future when you can analyze the data from, a couple years of, is it time related? Is it location related? And I think that would be a very interesting presentation as well. Definitely.
I'm kind of looking forward to that. There have been kind of rumors about, things like, do the horses go in the same place every time? And some people tend to say, yeah. So I think there is a lot of potential, kind of a fun project, but really cool data to be analyzed. So stay tuned. Maybe we'll see each other again.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Emma. Another virtual round of applause. Thank you. We appreciate you being here.
I hear it. All right. Thanks for having me again. And I'm going to step off to listen to the rest of the talks.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. We are buzzing along here right on time. Our next presenter is Madison White. And Madison graduated from the University of Cincinnati in 2020 with a bachelor's in geography and a focus on human geography with a double minor in history and political science. While there, she was president of the on-campus geography club for 2 years and project manager of Hope After Hate, which is what we're going to be hearing about today. She also interned for Planning and Development Services of Kenton County, and Madison is now working for Sanitation District Number 1 in Northern Kentucky as the geospatial data scientist. Please welcome Madison White with her presentation on Hope After Hate.
Hello, can you see me?
We can see you, Madison.
Okay, cool. Thank you for having me. I'm gonna also follow Brian's with turning my video off after I get everything set up. First, I'm going to put the story map in the chat. That way people can follow along with it. That and there's some links that I'm not going to show in this presentation because of the time that they take up. So it's helpful to just view that on your own time. That and there's a lot of information in here. And it's just easier to maybe go back through and digest everything because it's heavy information. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, so Hope After Hate was my project. First of all, is called Poland and Germany, Sharing and Mapping Moniek's Legacy. And I made this story map after coming back from Poland and Germany in October of 2019. Myself and my fellow classmates, there were 15 classmates altogether, and then my professor, her brother, and 4 members of a professional crew. We all went to Europe to follow my professor's father's story through the Holocaust. So Hope After Hate originally it's a multimedia project, and it was created to help Holocaust education in school, like just improve it and make it more interactive for students, because as technology grows, they'll need more methods that are more beneficial in their educational situations, just to help them grasp the information and understand it in a way that they have the ability to understand it. And yeah, we had a lot of fun doing it. We were all chosen completely by random, because we all brought different things into this project, and all of us are University of Cincinnati students. Well, most of us have graduated by now, but at the time we were all UC students, and each had our own characteristics. For instance, I was the only geography major chosen out of, I believe, 90 or 100 applicants. I didn't really know what I brought to the table that she fell in love with, and every day or every time we would talk about it, why she chose me, she would just be because it was just perfect. Like mapping, why not have mapping, and we can follow his story through a map, which it was right up my alley. Over to the right, this map I chose actually pinpoints several concentration camps or killing centers. To the, I believe, green ones are the killing centers, and it just gives a little bit of information about the camp, the country, and then just a brief history of it. And then you can see this is not all of them. There's way more, but this does give a brief overlook of how far they expanded across Europe. And this was not made by me, but I felt it was a good example of what we were hoping for with me being involved in the project. But yes, so with the start of this project, we have to talk about who this story focuses on, and it's Moniak, my professor Hagit Lamore's father. He lived in Częstochowa, Poland, and when the Nazis invaded, he was only 8 years old, and that was in 1939. And he kept a positive attitude, a positive outlook through everything that he experienced, which really resonated with all of us on the 7-day journey across 2 countries. And we saw so much Holocaust history. Some of it did revolve around his story, and then others in general were just, it was just needed to understand to grasp the information that this happened to everyday people. It happened to neighbors, to brothers, to sisters. It happened everywhere, all over Europe, and on a very large scale of population. So our first stop after we left the States was Warsaw, Poland. This picture on the right was taken in a town square, and the box he's turning made music. And it was classic Polish music. It was so beautiful. And it was really interesting to see just how, I guess, for the lack of a better word, European it really looked over there. It was just so interesting because Warsaw was completely decimated during the war. They had to rebuild from the ground up, and they rebuilt it to look exactly the way it did prior to the war. There's not a lot of modernity in it. It's very old school or old European style. You can tell by the buildings. I mean, of course, you do see the building being reconstructed in the far right, but it was just really cool because it felt like we time traveled. And driving around on the bus, it was so interesting to see the age, but at the same time, those buildings weren't actually that old because they were all just rebuilt. So our first stop off of the bus was to a public park dedicated to Frederick Chopin. He was born in Poland, and he was really he's really involved in the golden age. Poland really holds on to his greatness. And what was so unique about this park is as you're walking around, you hear faint piano playing in the background, and you have no idea where it's coming from because you cannot see the speakers. So it's almost like it's coming from the flowers, which is where we eventually found a speaker because we were convinced that it was in there. And so it was really beautiful. And we learned a lot about the different ages that Poland had gone through, the different periods of time. Poland itself has only experienced 20 years of independent nationality. They have been occupied by lots of other countries. Sweden being one, Germany, Russia. Russia held the most. Russia held Poland the longest, and actually 2 different periods during the communist era and prior to that. I believe prior to World War I, they also held a little bit. And yeah, so Poland is definitely trying to gain its own sense of independence, even today, as they continue to grow. But after leaving Frederick Chopin, our first piece of Holocaust history was the Warsaw Ghetto Wall. There's several pieces still standing. And this is the wall here. They have this little tree with the red ornament. It was dedicated from Nagasaki, Japan. And then they have a map of where the wall encompassed the ghetto, which this This ghetto here was different than lots of other ones. There was absolutely no structure to it. It was just cut off in some random places. Sometimes you'd have it going through a building, and that building not even being really considered part of the ghetto. Like, people would come into work, and it would just be so happen that they would look into where these people were being held. And even today, it's surrounded by very modern looking apartments that were built in the 70s. And it's just strange to see like these houses and these apartments, and it just kind of surrounding this super, super important piece of history. And that's why they kept it up, because they want people to always remember what happened here, because the Holocaust survivors are perishing every day. Just the age that they're reaching, it just their history is slipping, and so it's super important for Poland to also remember and memorialize it, because so many Polish Jewish people were affected, and it was just amazing. And even you can see even in the little slots in the bricks, there's little stones. That's very important in Jewish religion, is to leave a stone at a memorial site, or even in a cemetery, for remembrance. And it was super beautiful. My professor and her brother both left some stones here. I don't believe we caught a picture of them, but they had, I believe, their father's birth date on them. But he wasn't kept in Warsaw. He was actually in a different ghetto, but we'll get to that. And then after leaving the wall, we went to a kind of an open square. And this was where we visited the Warsaw Uprising of 1944 memorial. This commemorates the Polish resistance that rose up against the Nazis. There were two different uprisings actually in Warsaw. This one took place August 1st, 1944, and it lasted until October 2nd of the same year. What they did just completely took the Nazis by surprise. They did not think they were going to be ever upended or anything like that. They did end up suppressing the uprising, but the fact that they even did it, and they were one of the first to do it, sparked many uprisings along the way. And as you can see, it is remembered as one of the largest revolts during the Nazi occupation. And in around the corner in a different square, they have one dedicated to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of 1943. So this one happened before the Polish one, or the Polish Uprising. And this occurred during liquidation of the ghetto. They realized that there were some people still left, and they were able to bring in weapons and artillery and everything and hide it. And then they held for almost a month. And it was the largest revolt led by Jewish people in World War II. The sculpture here is showing Mordecai and Elowitz. Mordecai was the leader of the uprising, and he is given a portrayal similar to that of David in the story of David and Goliath. And he is shown with men, women, and children. They're all holding different weapons of sorts. And they're showing like the strength of climbing out of the rubble, which represented the Nazi occupation. Unfortunately, similar to that of the Polish uprising, they were also put down, and many of them did die due to the revolt itself. But a lot of people still look at him as a hero, which of course he is to the Jewish people. And you can see along the bottom of the memorial itself, there are also stones there and flowers. And then from Warsaw, while still in Warsaw, as we were getting ready to leave, we took a brief look into the Polish Jewish History Museum, which was really cool. It was very large. It wasn't part of our agenda because we were on a very tight schedule because we would be filming for these projects that we were doing, which included a play, an audience immersive play, a 360 virtual reality tour, a podcast, and the documentary. So we couldn't spend a lot of time here, but most of our shooting would be taking place in Częstochowa and in Germany later on. But we got to spend the whole day in Warsaw and just look around and explore, and it was really cool. So from Warsaw, we drove to Częstochowa, which was 3 hours away. And that is where we really enter Moniak's story. So Częstochowa is located almost toward the border of Czechoslovakia, or Czechia, or what used to be Czechoslovakia. And it was the third largest city in Poland before the war. And now I think it's toward the 13th or 14th. And the city is most known for the Jasna Gora. It is a 600-year-old Catholic monastery, which holds the Black Madonna, and she is known as the protector of Poland or the Queen of Poland. And the cathedral itself, or the monastery itself, is a very large pilgrimage site for Catholics. When we did get to tour the Jasna Gora, it was impeccable. Like, it was amazing. The grandeur of the church, the area where Black Madonna is, was all very old wood, pristine, very well taken care of. You can definitely tell it's very well maintained. And just the amount of people coming in and out, definitely in today's times would not be possible. There was so many people. You could barely take one step and not bump into somebody. But it was truly amazing. And then after the Jasna Gora, we spent the rest of the evening trying to relax, to take a breather before we would move on to the next day, which would be filming. And our first stop was Moniak's home. So here's a snapshot of the home itself, and you blow it up. It used to be the way his father had set this up. The bottom would be the shoe factory. His father was a shoe kind of inventor or shoemaker. His father invented the process in Poland of attaching the top of the shoe to the bottom of the shoe and basically cutting out the middleman, but he would save himself a lot of time and a lot of money. And so he just started doing it himself. And that he grew a vast amount of wealth, and Moniak's family lived very well, very comfortably. So the top part was his actual home, and the bottom was the shoe factory itself. And the top part was split into two apartments or homes. One half would belong to Uncle Jacob, and the other half would belong to Moniak's father. And they had a maid, a butler, large kitchen, large dining room, a very grandeur lifestyle in the 1930s. And with that, he didn't really experience a lot of negativity in life up until 1939, when the Nazis invaded, and his whole life kind of changed at that moment. When the first ghetto in Częstochowa was built or created, his home just happened to be in the large ghetto, which was the very first one. And they realized their status and their wealth, and they were like, we can help people. So they started bringing in more families to live with them, just to give themselves some comfort And one of the things that Moniak did to help bring in money for the family was he would collect half-smoked cigarettes that people would just throw down, and then he would go collect them and resell them, just as if they were new cigarettes. And it was incredibly sad to hear that, because at 9 years old, no one should ever have to do anything like that to help support their family. But the fact that he was just smart enough to think, okay, what can I do to help my family? And that's what he did. It spoke a lot about his character and his positivity throughout of the whole experience. His home is still standing. It is now broken up into several apartments and random shops. Outside of it, it kind of does look aged. I mean, the building itself is built in the 1910s, I believe. And today you could just tell that the age has gotten to the building. Everything inside is broken up into different people's homes. What used to be 2 homes is now, I believe, 5. And the attic, which his mother, Moniak's mother, middle brother, and himself all hid at one point. And so Moniak was taken out and put into the small ghetto. The attic is still there, and you can even see a false wall that they had put in. Well, the false wall is gone, but where the false wall would have gone, the markings are still around. And it was really hard to get pictures in there. One, because I was on the podcast team, so I was collecting sound bites with a mic and a system, a recorder, and it was hard, because, like, in the attic, because you couldn't step on the actual floor without going through it, so we had to step on the beams. And just seeing it reminded me a lot of Anne Frank's story of how they lived in the attic, or the space in the wall. The stories were very similar. Unfortunately, Moniak had already lost his father within the first year of the Nazi occupation, so he only had his oldest brother, the middle brother, and his mother. And the middle brother and mother were left behind in the attic, and the oldest boy had already gone out. He was a very skilled worker, and him and Uncle Jacob would go work for the Nazi houses, like do work on the Nazi houses. And so, in a way, Uncle Jacob devised the plan to save one of the younger boys. He said, one of my children's already hiding. I can take Moniak, or Vovek, which is his middle brother. And his mother said, take Moniak and hide him and keep him safe. And so he did. Uncle Jacob took him, and that was the last time Moniak would ever see his mother or brother. They were found a few days later and then deported to Treblinka, where they were mass murdered. And that's anybody who was transported to Treblinka was murdered within hours. That's Treblinka was not a concentration camp. It was strictly a killing center. Jewish prisoners went straight from train car to the gas chambers. So yes, the attic was the last time Moniak would see 2 of his family members. He was with his oldest brother, who looked after him, and Uncle Jacob as well. He was hidden in a furniture factory until that was discovered, and then Moniak went into Hastag-Pelsri, which is the work camp there. It is completely destroyed now. Well, the buildings are empty, very looted and just not in good shape. And but yeah, he was there until 1945. And then we also saw the cemetery in Częstochowa. And there, a lot of mass murders took place there. It was a very hard place to go through. Like here at this gravestone, you can see the bullet hole from a machine gun where target practice was done. They also took marble out of the headstones. From Częstochowa, we went to Auschwitz, Auschwitz-Birkenau. We toured there. I don't put a lot of words in this section. It was very hard to go through. And it should never be an easy walk through. But here you can see the map of all of the different concentration camps, killing centers, transit camps across Europe. That art installation was called Geography of Murder. This is the Book of Names, where all of the known murders, all of the names of the known murders are put, and it was wall to wall. And here's some pictures of the Zyklon B cans and a cattle car. And this is in Birkenau, looking down the path from the train station to the gas chambers. And then here's the train station. Oh no. And then from Auschwitz, we went to Krakow, but this was just an in-between stop. So I will let you all look at that on your own. And Frankfurt was also in between. And then so Moniak's story ended in Buchenwald. This was a camp set up as work camp and had 88 subcamps. And unlike Auschwitz and Treblinka, it was strictly a work camp, forced labor. But it did have starvation, medical experimentation, lethal injection, and hangings as way to torture or kill the prisoners. And these are the train tracks where the prisoners would come in. Moniak arrived here in January of 1945, and he would be liberated on April 11th, 1945. Upon arriving, he got very sick and was put into the little camp. He had a fever, but he was also very well taken care of because he spoke Polish. And so instead of being labeled a Jewish prisoner, he was labeled a Polish prisoner. And the Polish were just treated a little bit better than the Jewish prisoners. I mean, they were all treated completely inhumanely, but they pulled a little bit more rank. And this was the latrine, which is where the resistance grew. And here is where one of the, what are they called? Barracks would be put. And these are the cleaning chambers. And then this is some of the art pulled from barrack walls. And this was the crematorium where they burned the already dead bodies. And it's still standing, and it's still the same way that they left it in 1945. And then lastly, there's this really unique plaque here in Buchenwald where they keep this plaque 98.6 degrees, and they labeled it with every nationality that was held in the camp. And the reason they keep it 98.6 degrees is because it represents the one thing that all of these people shared, and it was the fact that they were human. And after the camp, he was reunited with his older brother. His older brother was survived the war. And out of a family of 200 people, only 6 survived the Holocaust. And today, Moniak lives with his wife, whom he had 3 children. And he continues to inspire us every day because he's still living. And unfortunately, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about 10 years ago. So his memory is slipping. And that's why this project was created, to help preserve his memory and to help preserve the memory of all of the Holocaust survivors that continue to pass away every day. And here's the picture of the group. I am so sorry for running over. I didn't realize how much information was in here.
I think you did an awesome job, Madison. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll give a couple seconds here. Maybe anybody has any questions for Madison. You kind of mentioned in the beginning other avenues of how you're telling the story. Could you briefly explain other avenues like a podcast or anything?
Yeah. I realized I didn't really dive into that much. So the audience immersive play will tell Moniac's story by a single actor. And what we will plan on doing is projecting images onto huge screens that kind of put the audience in the setting without really trapping them in. We want to give the person still the ability to move around and be about without feeling claustrophobic, but also be where Moniac was. And then we also have a virtual reality which puts you in the settings that we've captured, from Buchenwald to the attic to his home to the choosing squares or selection squares, and you move about through that experience based on choices. And then the podcast also the podcast is more about our experience through it as students and as the professional crew, just going through city by city, experience by experience, and kind of delving into how we feel about that, how we felt. And then the Hope After Hate documentary is linked below. It was published on May 6th, 2020, and it just shows how we made it, and it includes our nightly confessionals as well.
Okay, thank you. You had one other question. What was the first map in the story map? If you could go back to the home page.
There you go. The first map shows the different, well, not all of them, but a good diversity, I would say, of different concentration camps. And it includes several of the killing centers. So it includes Treblinka, Belzec, and Auschwitz, and I believe Majdanek is on here as well. Sobibor. Oh, there's Majdanek. And it just shows how wide ranged it was from Eastern Europe all the way to Western Europe. And over in the Auschwitz tab, it definitely shows more in detail with the geography of murder. That's something that really caught my eye, and I appreciate the time it took for that person to create that map at Auschwitz, because a lot of people don't realize how wide range the concentration camps, transit camps, extermination camps really are. And I mean, they went all the way from Belarus all the way to France, so they covered a lot of miles.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great presentation, Madison. Thank you very much. Round of applause for Madison. Thank you again for being here and sharing that story.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, transitioning on. Our final presentation today is from Dr. Amy Rock. Amy Rock is a community geographer who has worked with cities large and small. An avid proponent of community leadership, she encourages her students to become engaged in their communities and think critically about spatial politics, community development, and the role of nonprofit organizations in our society. She has been teaching geography and geospatial courses at Humboldt State University in California since 2014 and is also the director of the online geospatial certificate program. In the past year, she has co-authored Geospatial Concepts, the Fundamentals of Geospatial Science with Nicholas Malloy, and published some of her work on public participation and public funding. She was also selected to the editorial board of Cartographic Perspectives and was appointed to the Committee on the Status of Women in Geography, a standing committee of the American Association of Geographers. Her current research examines the relationship between company towns and their economic dependence. Please welcome Dr. Amy Rock from Humboldt State University with some top tips for mapping with Arcgis Pro.
All right, so this will be kind of a complete departure from what we just did. Wow, that was intense. I'm trying to get my head back in the space now so I can present. Thanks for putting me after that one, Ryan. All right, so let me
about that part.
That's okay. That's okay. This will maybe be a little more lighthearted path into the social hour, so we can all decompress from that intensity. All right, so let me share my screen here, and hopefully that is working okay. Everybody see that? Okay, so I recently authored a book called Mapping with Arcgis Pro that has a lot of step-by-step tutorial kind of stuff in it, and Ryan had asked me to present something from that, and I thought, wow, rather than give you a sort of a step-by-step presentation, I want to kind of hit the highlights of mapping with Pro, but not just mapping with Pro. A lot of this stuff will work in really any GIS app that you're in, but there are a few Pro specific things that I'll try to remember to call out as we go through. Let me get on the right screen here. Okay, so first thing I want to talk about is the use of the color black. Typically, when you pull stuff into an application, you start loading data layers in, everything comes in like full 100% black, black outlines, black text, black everything. And that's overwhelming, right? This map that I've put up here on the left, this is kind of the default, and hopefully Ryan's not too scarred from this because this is borrowed from a lab that I used many years ago, and still do, actually. I torment students with this one regularly, but you can see all the labels are the same color, all of the lines are the same color, and even though there's a little bit of differentiation, right? The rivers are white, the roads have some casings on them. It's very noisy and it's hard to tell what's happening. So what I generally recommend you do is you knock everything back to about 70% gray to start with. Just take it all back, and then turn things back up to 100% black that you really want to pop off the map. So in this case, I left the labels alone. We'll get to those in a second. But I knocked back the road casing and I knocked back the county boundaries. And I also did dashed lines on those. And this is one of the things that Pro does better than ArcMap used to. I don't know if you can see it really well on your screens here, but notice that a lot of times when you did dashed lines or dotted lines in ArcMap and you had overlapping shapes, you wound up with a lot of kind of chaos as the lines didn't exactly line up perfectly. And so here, they're not a perfect match, but they're a little bit better. You still get the idea that they're dashed. And what that does is it makes them visible, but it really drops them back in the hierarchy. And you're gonna hear me say that a lot, talking about building a hierarchy in your map. So don't be afraid to use gray. Generally, you should be afraid to use black, right? You should use it very sparingly. It's a very, very strong statement on your map, right? So following on that, the next thing to do is get away from the default fonts that ArcMap and ArcPro give you. So here we are again with those default fonts, and you can see I already used some of the principles that I just talked about with the labels themselves. So I knocked back the county labels to about 60% gray, just to build that hierarchy again a little bit. But this is just the default. I think it's Tahoma, the generic font that comes with ArcMap. And if you need something quick and dirty, it's perfectly fine, but it's kind of boring, right? So if you just change it up a little bit, I switched the font here, and I did a couple of other things as well, but I changed the font to something that's still sans serif and still professional looking, but it's just got a little bit more personality to it. So it gives me a little more flavor in my map. And then the other thing that I did in order to help improve the hierarchy as well was I changed the county labels. I did them all caps and I put a little space in, right? And area features, we tend to label those with something that spreads out a little bit so that we get this sense that it is an area and not a point. And so that just adds a little more clarity between the two sets of labels here. And then you can see also with the change in typeface, Minneapolis and St. Paul are popping out a little bit stronger than the other two cities or the rest of the cities, which is exactly what I want because those are the two biggest cities in Minnesota. So I've already kind of developed this structure just with a couple of simple little changes in here. All right, next thing is give your labels some space, right? They need a little breathing room. So here I kind of zoomed in on the Twin Cities here. And you can see that any place that labels cross text, and this is just the regular dynamic labeling in ArcMap. I haven't done any annotation or anything yet, which is why everything's kind of stomping all over everything. But you can see that there's just line work crossing my text in all kinds of places. And that's harder to read, right? It makes it a little bit harder on your map reader to figure out what's happening. So you can do this in a couple of ways. You can do halos, or you can do label masking. And you see what happened here is it just sort of interrupts the line just a tiny bit, right? So let me kind of draw your attention here. So if I look at Sauk Rapids, for example, over here, and then I look at it over here, it just briefly interrupts that line so that that text is a lot more readable. And that's kind of the key to doing this. You really don't want it to stand out and be like a neon border around things, right? Here's also, if you look at Minneapolis, Egan looks a little better, even though it's still sitting on top of the symbol. So I would probably go in later and move that a little bit. But, you know, even under St. Paul, we've kind of hidden that road a little bit so that you can read the text a lot more clearly. And so this one, I did this one with halos. And the idea with halos is that you match the background color, right? So it really does just kind of look like I erased a few things here and there wherever the lines cross, right, in the counties as well. And you can see that what I did, if you look at where the labels that kind of overlap into Wisconsin here, you can see a tiny little border around that. But if you take a halo and you crank it to, like, you know, full white or full black or whatever, so that it looks like an outline, you're adding noise. You're adding a lot of noise to the map, which is adding cognitive load to your reader. And just like with the internet, if the reader can't figure out the map in a short period of time, they're going to leave it. So you want to turn down that cognitive noise. So your halos should always match the background color. Excuse me. And what Pro has added, so if you've got, you know, this is a nice little black and white map here. If you've got a full color map with lots of different things going on, it can be hard to make that color choice. So Pro now has a thing called label masking that you can do that essentially knocks out the features underneath without having that halo effect. So either way, if it's a simple single color thing, you can do halos. They're pretty quick. They're right in the label properties. If you've got a lot going on in the background, you can use label masking, which is a little bit more involved, but totally worth it if your background is busy. All right, color. I spent a fair chunk of time here in black and white, but lots of people like to use color. Color is important. My students always complain about using black and white until we get to color, and then they go, oh, color is hard. But, you know, it's nice to use color. It's visually interesting. It gets people going. So I grabbed some data here. This is from City of Sacramento. I've got some roads. I've got a light rail in here. I've got some historic districts, and then I've got schools and hospitals. And, you know, it's brightly colored. It's kind of eye-catching, but it's hard to know, again, what am I supposed to read first? What am I supposed to look at? And the light rail just kind of disappears in here. It's really hard to kind of pick it out. You got to kind of follow it along to figure out where it goes. So I'm going to start by knocking back a lot of the color. Same thing that we did with the shades of gray and the outlines and everything else. So I cranked the transparency up on the background color, and then same thing with the roads. I cranked those up a little bit more transparent so you can see all of a sudden the light rail pops out and I can find it, but I can still easily see the roads. They're just not competing. I changed the historic districts to a gradient fill with some transparency on so you could still see the road network. And then the schools and the hospitals pop out a little bit better. And then I also decided to add a little box around this little hospital symbol because I thought it was kind of hard to see even with the other changes. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But, you know, I think you get a lot of the same effect. You could still brighten this, a couple things up here on this if you wanted to a little bit, but you still got the effect of full color, but with a little bit more sense of what you're supposed to pay attention to, right? So if we're talking about the historic districts, I might come up just a little bit brighter. If I'm talking about the schools, I might make them a little bit brighter. But again, there's that hierarchy of information so that you're reading into the map in layers, right? I mentioned adjusting that hospital symbol to suit me. Making your own symbols is super easy. in Pro. So here's an example. This is here in the city of Eureka. We've got an organic waste service being explored. And so I wanted to show where the trucks would originate, and then as well as all the stops. And actually all the stops are little green compost bins, and that's kind of noisy, so I might go back and adjust that. But I wanted a little garbage truck to do the thing. And of course, Esri doesn't have a little garbage truck, so I had to go make my own. So, you know, you go out to the internet, you find a picture of a garbage truck, you change this to picture marker, and then you go get it. And, you know, a lot of times people are like, well, but this is really cool, but the background's not transparent. Well, the easiest, cheatiest way to make transparent backgrounds is actually in PowerPoint. So I brought my little garbage truck into PowerPoint. I used the, on the pictures tab, there's a color setting, and you can set a transparent color. I clicked on the background went away. And then you can just save as picture. And I made it orange in PowerPoint as well, just because it was super easy to do it right there on the spot. Save it as picture, and then you bring it in here and it's ready to go with its little transparent background. If you ever did this in ArcMap, you know that you brought the picture in, and then in ArcMap you told it what the transparent color was. And this is a little faster and a little cleaner than it is in ArcMap, because you can remove multiple things, right? If it doesn't have a nice clean single color background, you can use the remove background tool and set that all up. But anyway, PowerPoint, oddly enough, is a handy tool to use for that. Symbols can also have layers now. Used to be you had a symbol, maybe it had an outline with it, and that was pretty much it. But in Pro, symbols have lots of layers. So this is the watercolor style, which was developed by John Nelson. And you can grab it from the Esri Style Gallery. There's a lot of really fun, cool ones there. And it's probably a little frivolous for municipal mapping, but it might be fun for like a tourism map or something. But if you look at this symbol, it's actually constructed of 4 separate layers in the symbol process. So there's a picture fill as a background. There's a little picture strokes that's meant to look like a pencil line. Then he's got another picture fill on top, and then a gradient fill to give you this sort of watercolor edge feel to it. And that's pretty elaborate, and I'm probably not going to do that myself in most cases, but here's that hospital symbol again that I made. And it's just 2 pieces, right? So it's the little plus marker that I started with. And then you just hit the wrench and you come in here and you add a symbol layer. And then I just added a box symbol around it and set the color for that. And voila, I have my own hospital symbol. Right? A lot of you probably do statistical data. And this applies, you know, some of these things transfer over to Arc Online. I notice a lot of you are working in Arc Online and doing dashboard things. Some of those things will transfer. This most definitely transfers over, and this is super important. So I've got a map here. This is refugee populations around the world. And you can see it's pretty dramatic in certain parts of the world. So I've got a lot of little dots in various places, and then I've got some great big dots, particularly here in Syria. So let's say I want to zoom in and see a little bit more about what's happening in Syria. When I do that, it looks really lame, right? So what's happened here is I now have my smallest values next to my largest values. So there's not a lot of contrast for one thing going on, but also this doesn't look very terrifying. This is over 6.5 million people, which is more than the population of Kentucky. So that's a big deal, right? So I want this to be dramatic. So if you change the scale of your map, you need to be able to change the scale of the proportional symbols. So if I decided I was going to map at this scale, I would just go in here and I would change these 2 values. But you definitely want to look at your extremes whenever you do statistical mapping. You want to look at your highest and lowest values. Figure out how best to represent those on the map, and then everything else can kind of fall in the middle. You know, and it might be that, you know, in this case, if you look at this map up here, you can see Syria is the biggest by far, all by itself. It might be that your highest value is kind of an outlier and you want to have it in its own classification so that it can really be called out. And you might even want to label it separately to do that. But you definitely want to look at that range of values and see if it makes sense, right? On this map, the little tiny dots look fine, they make sense. On this map, they're really hard to see, right? So I would probably just take everybody up a little bit in size. Another cool thing that showed up in Pro that I'm pretty sure you can do it in Arc Online. I'm almost positive I've done it. It's called value by alpha, except that it's not called that. This is the scientific term for it, but Arc Pro calls it something else. So here's that map again, and you can see Syria, it's really big, it tramples on everything. What I want to do is be able to see that, be impressed by it, but still be able to see what's happening around it. So I'm going to use value by alpha. And Pro calls that vary symbology by attribute. And there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can change rotation and color, but what I'm working with is the transparency. So you pick a field, and then you can tweak these numbers to get things to look right. So in this case, I picked the exact same field as the symbol size field, the data from 2018. I tweaked these so that I could get Syria to show up, but be nice and light so that I could see everything that was happening underneath it. And then my small symbols are almost completely opaque. And you can see most of the symbols fall into that range. This, if you spend a lot of time in Arc Online, you'll notice this same interface from Arc Online. So value by alpha can be super valuable for that. It also works really well for things where you have overlapping values. Maybe you have hot and cold values and you want to show the extremes, but you also want to show maybe the middle where they interact. There's a great map. Ken Field does a lot of election mapping, and he's got a red and blue interacting in the middle. But then he also uses value by alpha to sort of mask out by population. So the stronger colors where there's more population and the paler colors where there's less population. So you get a much better sense of what's actually happening with that data. So value by alpha can be pretty tremendous. And it used to be just an awful laborious process to do, but Pro makes it super easy. Pro is also much better at transparency in general. So it renders much better in a lot of cases. Like I said earlier, when I was knocking back colors, I was doing that with transparency as well. Terrain maps. Everybody loves terrain maps. They're sexy, they're gorgeous, they're wonderful, but they're noisy. So this is, I've got a chunk of Humboldt County here with the road network on it. And you can see, you know, there's a lot going on, right? It's a lot of ways we call this West Coast Appalachia because it's green and it's hilly and it's rural. A lot of us have transplanted out this way and we refer to ourselves as West Coast Appalachians. But anyway, we have all these windy roads up through the hills, and it's really hard to find a road color that's going to show up on this, right? This is really, there's a lot going on with that terrain, but you can kind of tell here the terrain informs the road network. So it's kind of important to have it here, and especially if I was doing something like watershed analysis, I would definitely want the terrain on here, but there's too much, right? So we bring transparency to the rescue again. And in this case, I did a hillshade. This is just a straight hillshade out of Arc Pro, nothing fancy. Kicked it to about, I think 60 or 70% transparency. I put the DEM on top of it at like 70% transparency, just to kind of give a little extra shadow in the valleys. And now, this is the exact same road color. The roads show up. So I still got the terrain to kind of show me what's going on, but it's not so noisy that I can't figure out what's happening. All right, last but not least, map elements. Map elements are one of the, I think the most, I don't want to say it's the most challenging technically, but it's one of the things that people struggle with a lot. The tendency to put really large map elements in is overwhelming. I see it all the time, and it's really, it's not the focus. It shouldn't be the focus, right? The map is the focus. So I'll start with the legend, right? So this is a legend from parcel layers. This is zoning codes. And if you work with this data all the time, these numbers probably mean a lot to you and they're hugely significant. But if you take this to a public meeting, people are gonna be like, what is that? I don't even understand, right? And this junk at the top should never be there because that doesn't, you know, that's not useful to anybody. So clean it up, right? Give it a nice name. I used the legend name feature here because you should never call your legend legend, but you can certainly call it something useful. And then I just relabeled these to something that's going to be more meaningful to the general public in order to take this map to a town hall meeting. So first thing is clean up your legend. You know, keep the size important. Depends on the purpose of the map, depends on the purpose of the meeting. But the legend should never be larger than the map itself, which I've actually seen in public meetings. It's a little terrifying. And then the rest of your map elements should be there and they should be available, but they shouldn't be pushy, right? So if you look at this map, and I apologize, in the process of compressing this map is like 3 feet tall. The bathymetry lines got a little bit pushy, But can you spot the map elements in this one? They're tucked down in the corner, and I get a little kitschy. I used a redwood tree for North Arrow, but you know, it's just down here. The credits, the scale bar, the date, all of that stuff can go in here, and it's important to have it and have it available, but it should be subtle. You know, sometimes you might need it to be black. Like if you look at a topo sheet, the scale bar is often in black, but it's also often in a really thin line weight, so that it's not the first thing that you see, right? The map is the focus. And, you know, even if you do that, if you've got it in 100% black, keep that line weight thin. And Pro does thin line weights way better than ArcMap ever did. So it's definitely an option now that we didn't have before. So keep that stuff under control, because while it's important to have it, it shouldn't be the focus, right? The map is the focus. And then also by using the other things we talked about, fonts, line colors, line weights, colors in general, what you're supposed to look at first should be what pops off the page at you first, right? Because when you read a story, you read top to bottom and you know what direction to go through the thing. But when you're trying to read a map, or you're trying to teach someone to read a map, you've got to lead them through it, right? And so you've got to show them, like, this is what I want you to focus on first, and then this is what I want you to focus on next. And all of these little tricks will get you to that point. I got one more bonus tip. So we did a lot of things here with customizing and moving off of the defaults, and you don't want to have to do that every time, right? Nobody wants to do that. That's too much work. So anytime you make one of those changes and customizations, you want to save as style. So you make the change in your panel over here, and then you click the little hamburger menu, and it's going to give you the option to save as style. You can give it a name, you can make categories, you can put subfolders and all of those kinds of things, and you can put these on a server and share them with your whole organization. But once you do that, then they're going to show up in the gallery. So the next time I want to make a map and I want to use that custom little hospital thing, it's right there and I'm ready to go. You can see here I made a black and white highway shield because for some reason that doesn't exist already in Pro, or Interstate Shield rather. So I made my own, and there it is. It's ready for me to use it anytime I want to use it. Okay, that was really fast. I didn't want to cut into our happy hour too much, so I went through that really quickly. Quick shameless plug for our geospatial certificate program if you're looking at one down here at the bottom, but any questions?
Thank you very much, Dr. Rock. Most of you probably don't know this, but Dr. Rock was my cartography professor at Ohio University when I was there, and I can tell you that this presentation took me right back into that computer lab, hearing her.
Are you traumatized? I'm sorry.
When I shuddered a little bit when you said the word legend should not be on your legend. That one was ingrained into my head. But I think that this was a great presentation, a great reminder to everybody here. Just the aspects of cartography and how simple steps can make a great map greater. And yeah, I think it was awesome. You're getting a lot of good compliments. Looking for any questions. I'm not really seeing any.
No. Yeah, I didn't really get in too much into the nitty gritty of how to do all this stuff in Pro. I'm happy to, answer questions by email if you're trying to figure it out. Or, you can always buy my book or something. But by the way, don't pay full price for it because it's always on sale. You can get it through Amazon or you can get it directly from the publisher. But it should always be on sale somewhere. So it's got details. There's a lot of great web resources out there if you look up one thing specific. So mostly I just want to make you aware that Pro will do these things and that they're best practices. And then, like I said, if you've got questions about specifics, I'm happy to respond to email.
What is the name of the book?
Mapping with Arcgis Pro.
It should be easy enough to find.
Right?
Okay, well, I'm just seeing a bunch of praise. I think that means perfect presentation. Bam.
Wow, I'll take it. No questions. That's impressive.